Hello, and welcome back to Civic Concord, a podcast where we share information, highlight important topics, and hear directly from people involved in town government. Today, we're going to be talking about an upcoming town election and the roads program. And we're here to talk about how Concord Town Meeting voted to approve Article 8, which is a major investment in road and safety improvements. But there's also a second step. For the borrowing to move forward, voters need to approve a debt exclusion at the ballot box. And that means that you'll need to vote in the special town election on Tuesday, August 19th. So first, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what you need to know about the election, and then I'll introduce our guests. So our special town election is on Tuesday, August 19th, 2025. And there are a few options for voting. If you want to vote by mail, the ballots will be going out the week of July 29th. Voter information guides will also be mailed out on July 29th to all registered voters. And if you haven't registered yet, you can register to vote by Friday, August 8th at 5 p.m. There'll be in-person absentee voting available at the town clerk's office once ballots arrive, right up until noon on Monday, August 18th. And if you want to vote by mail but you haven't applied yet, you still have time. The deadline is Tuesday, August 12th at 5 p.m. Just a reminder, polling locations for Election Day, Election Day polling will be from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on August 19th. And if you're in Precinct 1, you can go to the Planning and Land Management Building at 141 Keyes Road. Precincts 2 and 3 will be at Harvey Wheeler. And precincts 4 and 5 are at the Hunt Recreation Center at 90 Stowe Street. So now let's talk about roads. I'd like to introduce our guests here today. We have Alan Cathcart, who is the Concord Director of Public Works. We have Alyssa Sandoval, the Community Development Director, and Steve Dookran, Town Engineer. Like to say hello?
Good morning.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Megan.
Great to be here. Thank you. Well, we're happy to be here. And as I said, the purpose is to talk about Article 8, what's it all about, and why is it so important for Concord's roads and sidewalks?
Well, Megan, yes, this is Alan. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue. This is something Concord Public Works, it's near and dear to our heart, and we've been dealing with road improvements and sidewalk maintenance for years. That's a core responsibility of Public Works. Within Public Works, we have an engineering division. They are the division that sort of identifies the larger needs for repairs and replacements. We have a highway grounds group that does the routine maintenance and operation. And we report to a Public Works commission who oversees a lot of our investments and operations to get a perspective as far as where the community's needs are and interests. Over the years, Concord Public Works has, in the town of Concord, has entertained annual vetting of capital plans. And we look at it in a situation where we'll identify a need for the next year. We'll look at the funding required to meet those needs. We submit it as part of a budget packet, for review by the town. And what we found is, since Steve Dookran and his team have started sort of managing this the last 5 years, we've broken our requests up into very discrete bundles so people can understand what we're asking for and what will be spent. It was a different model than we used previously, where everything was sort of lumped together. So what would happen is we may have a total ask of somewhere along the order of, maybe it was $5-6 million, and it included a lot of different things. It included some road improvements, maintenance, sidewalk, some traffic and transportation improvements, safety, special safety initiatives. And what happened is some of these, we may end up with $2.5 million or so to spend. And so everybody heard through the vetting process of their pet interest, but they didn't realize that we didn't get all the money to invest. So Steve and his team started breaking those requests apart so people could understand what's being approved and what wasn't. And so that was informative, and that we started seeing that some of the things that we identified as needs, for instance, sidewalk replacement improvements or major intersections that might be improved, did not get passed or approved, through the finance vetting process. So after years of underinvestment, we realized that we weren't really following a model that worked. A few years ago, the FinCom the Finance Committee identified, and I think rightly so, that large capital investment should be looked at not just year to year, kind of this hand-to-mouth approach, but over multiple years. So in keeping with our request, Public Works started looking at 5 and 10-year plans. It was very informative in that when we started looking at those, we saw what the real costs were for investment or, more importantly, underinvestment. So at this point, last year, we engaged a consultant firm to assist us in sort of a long-range assessment and investment strategy, which is different than the year-to-year, looking at multiple years. And what was really interesting is when you start looking at a larger horizon, you can start seeing things that, a spending model that may not be obvious from year to year became very clear. And what was clear is if we spend more money up front to do significant replacement or repairs of the aging infrastructure, especially on the pavement condition, both on the roads and sidewalks, over the long haul, over a 10-year period, we could see improvements in conditions and at the same time a decrease in the actual cost over the long haul. So it was a different model, a different view.
A long view.
A long view. And again, it was sort of informed by the direction of the Finance Committee. Engineering took that on, and I think the town now has better information in which we can say, there's got to be a better way because we know we've been losing ground. We were hearing that loud and clear throughout the community as far as the conditions of the roads and increased rates of deterioration. So I think that was a very interesting but informative assessment. And that's kind of led us to this point.
That makes sense. I think so many people are interested in this, and it received, pretty overwhelming support at town meeting. And I've been thinking about how the current condition of our roads affects residents, and it really seems to impact all members of the community, drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians alike.
Yeah, Steve, Dookran, you might want to sort of, speak to that because you actually hear from the residents and customers.
Yes. So Steve Dookran. We get a lot of calls from residents about the condition of their street. Everybody wants their street to be in a better condition. Occasionally, some people would say, well, it's okay because it slows down the traffic, but generally, the vast majority of people are asking that the street be brought up to par because they can't deal with the deterioration, the potholes. And we actually had a few years ago someone who told us that driving down a section of Main Street was like driving in Beirut.
Wow.
I was wondering as I thought about that, what did he mean by that reference? What was he trying to avoid? The potholes or something else?
Wow.
But so we get all those calls, and with regards to people driving, but then there's the bicyclists who, they're endangered by having the sides of the roads in poor condition. And we also look at if there are a lot of locations, especially residential streets that don't have sidewalks. And if people have to walk, they will walk in the street, and walking their dogs and their kids going to school, and having a good road condition is certainly going to be helpful.
And so I think one thing that's come up a lot is the term backlog related to the problem here in Concord and trying to catch up. Can you talk a little bit about what backlog means and how big is the problem here?
Yes. So the term backlog was, we used the firm that talked about Stantec to determine that number. And today for the pavement, in terms of the condition of the pavement, and it is the value of the cost that will take to bring the pavement to a near perfect condition today. And so $21 million is 2024 number, end of 2024.
To bring all of our roads to
Yes,
that level
the
in Concord.
107 miles of roads, bringing them to a near perfect condition. That's what the backlog means. So that's today's dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And if that Alan continue to talk about the plan, if not addressed, it's estimated that within 10 years, so talking about the year 2035, the backlog could increase to $37 million.
37 million?
37
Wow,
million.
yeah.
And that's based on today's funding, the historical funding of $2.5 million per year. Our pavement condition index will continue to drop, and our backlog will continue to increase.
And it makes sense. The more a road deteriorates, the more expensive it is to bring back up, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And so what is, the question before the voters now is thinking about this 5-year road maintenance plan. What's on this plan, and how will this $27.5 million be used?
Yes, I can take that too. The $27.5 million consists of two parts. $25 million, towards the pavement management. That's towards where do you have the simpler methods of taking care of routine maintenance, and talking like crack sealing and fog sealing, going all the way to totally rebuilding the street if it's in very poor condition. So the $25 million would be geared towards that program over a 5-year period. And we will, we can spend it maybe $5 million a year, 5 plus in 1 year and less in another year. Mm-hmm. But that, if approved, and we have that funding, we have that flexibility to work with that number. And pavement condition, our goal is to get pavement condition index from the low 70s that it is today, and that's 72 out of 100, to 85 and upwards out of 100 at the end of the 5-year period. And then the $2.5 million over a 5-year period, that will be dedicated towards what we have been calling pedestrian safety improvements.
Okay.
Essentially, the idea is if we are going to be improving the pavement along a corridor, we would look at the opportunities to improve pedestrian safety.
Megan, I'm going to just interject on the engineers. They have their terminology, pavement condition index, or what we call PCI. People who've been paying attention have started to learn what that means. But for the general public, that's just a metric in which you can evaluate the condition of a road from 0 to 100, 100 being a brand new road, perfect condition. Generally speaking, pavement condition indexes that are less than 80 are not considered particularly good, 80
and we're
above.
In the 70s?
And we started, we've been in the 60s in the last few years. And part of that is just because we had been asking for money at town meeting. We'd get partially funded. Mm-hmm. And, we've actually, identified. We're not, in Public Works, we're not surprised where the road conditions have gone because we projected that would happen. If you underinvest, you will see a deterioration. But we've been making some pretty strategic investments lately, but often those investments are driven by this metric, which is town-wide. And so when you talk about one number, 85, that's not every road.
Yeah.
That's sort of a general assessment of all of the roads.
An average.
An average, yeah. So and people will hear that more and more about the PCI, but there's a combination of, and we're using programs and software now, which really help us, where they can sort of predict and give us projections as far as if you spend this much money on this road, this is what it will do to sort of optimize or maximize that, the investment. And so there's a tool that the engineers use, and it's now sort of more sort of standard in the industry. And then it's also informed by the engineers and the experience, kind of the real world. So it's sort of a combination of those two.
And that's, kind of industry best practice, right? I think during this process, we talked about other communities around us are, thinking about their PCI and understanding what their investment is and setting goals for that. And so we are doing the same thing. Is that fair?
Yes. Currently, we are using this system that's industry practice, but it's really, success is really contingent upon having enough money.
Right.
Right? You can have the best plan in the world.
You can have a goal for a certain PCI, but if you don't have the dollars to implement it, then it's not going to happen.
For sure.
Okay.
Megan, my recent mantra, and this is just across the board in Concord, and I just think this is a good example, where Concord likes to identify projects, and we are really good at that identification. Where we've been challenged is realistically saying, in order to achieve that successfully, what are the resources required?
Yep.
And if you don't really connect the resources to the final product or adapt it, you're always going to be, I guess, challenged or frustrated with the outcome. And so as staff, our job really is, when someone identifies a need, professionals need to look at it and say, this is how that can be realized. But if we don't put all those resources together, it could be it's time, it's staff, it's third-party consultants, it's contractors. If we don't get that right, we're not going to achieve the outcome people want. And I think that's the difference with this model than what we've done in the past. And I just say that's across the board in Concord.
Yeah, and if I might just jump in too, is I think one really good thing about Article 8 is that it not only provides the funding for the road maintenance and management, but it also provides a continuous stream of funding for the bicycle and pedestrian improvements that people have been advocating for. And so that's really important, in making an impact on people's daily lives, biking and walking around town.
I think that we've been hearing a lot about that lately. It's definitely been a hot topic and question. And I think one thing people would really love to hear about is, what are some of those examples of improvements that this funding could cover beyond the road improvement that Steve covered?
Okay. So I heard Alyssa say continuous. I got to say, hold on. It's always limited, right? So it's not continuous. But in order to answer the question properly, I think we have to examine first what our costs are, right, for all improvements other than just pavement. And the Stantec report, after the work they did recently, talks about missing sidewalks, right? There's a backlog of that, but the $13 million, I believe the number was, because they had identified that, important locations where sidewalks should be completed. So there's that number. And then there's a condition of the sidewalk itself or themselves throughout town. And there's a backlog there as well. And I think that was in the $7-8 million. And then there are those projects that I think you're asking about, Megan, that the pedestrian safety type projects like crosswalks and other kinds of intersections where we do have problems. So you're asking for examples of what can be done. So I believe, so that's what we have, right? We have a lot of needs, a lot of costs. What we have available would be the $2.5 million over the 5-year period under this article. And then we have been talking about, should we continue to get Chapter 90 money, which is a Mass State annual, funding, if that continues to come in at pretty much the same level it has been, then that money can also be focused towards these kinds of pedestrian type improvements. And that we estimate we'll continue to probably get another $500,000 or so per year.
And that's a reimbursement program with the state government, and it's how a lot of cities and towns pretty much only use some of that money to fund their pavement and road programs, and we certainly use it here, but we're looking for additional funds to increase the safety and the quality for our community.
Yeah, the other thing, Megan, to just highlight is in public works, we almost take our core responsibilities for granted. Most of the work we do in the right-of-way, whether it's our highway grounds through routine maintenance or repairs, filling potholes, making some improvements to sidewalks, it is safety related. That's a lot of what we do when we have engineering, design construction projects. We're making improvements for ADA compliance. For instance, that's built into our projects. I think the focus and attention on above and beyond that is what's sort of being brought to our attention. And these are the kind of larger issues. Stantec had done some work, with planning and engineering to identify areas of interest and concerns, through pedestrians, cyclists. We had a charrette of some sort, I think, over a year ago, Harvey Wheeler, where people were able to identify from their own perspective where they thought there were concerns. Those were compiled, and they're sort of in the mix as far as for consideration, as far as, how do we now go about identifying, if there's no funding, there's really not much of a conversation. That's been our problem to date. And I think that's what frustrated the community. And that also is challenging to staff when they're asked for things that they can't deliver because we just don't have funding. And oftentimes people think, well, isn't it just some white lines on the road? Well, no. There's much more to evaluating and understanding the safety implications. Are there structural elements? Is there signage elements? Or is there liability issues that you need to address? That all takes time and resources. That's why this borrowing authorization is so important. That does allow funds to do those sorts of things. So we can go beyond simply talking about it, but sort of start investing. And it goes from concept to design to probable cost estimates to a construction project. And these things are not small dollars. These can be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on. Areas that we've heard in part of these charrettes are, Kenny Dunn Square is a common area of, for instance, comes across. Haywood Meadow Crossing has come up. And it's not new to Public Works. We've been hearing this for years. Our challenge is just not getting the resources and attention on them. So I think that's why this is so exciting and important, where this debt exclusion is really the first time we've been able to put it together in a comprehensive ask, not piecemeal. And I think there's an interest in the community that says, if we fund these, what are we going to see? Well, that's going to be the next challenge for us, to make sure that people understand where we're spending the money and why we're spending it. And there's been a lot of conversation very recently with identifying roles and responsibilities in town, so that the community can understand, and we divide the roles and responsibilities in a way that is appropriate. For instance, staff can do the operations. We can do the sort of the maintenance. Engineering is going to be involved with design and working with consultants and developing contracts for construction. Planning with Alyssa's team is still looking at and working at the pedestrian interests as well, and connectivity needs across the community. And so we're going to put staff coupled with the Public Works Commission, who we report to in Public Works. The Select Board is interested. They have appointed a group, the Transportation Advisory Committee, otherwise known as TAC. They didn't exist 5 years ago. But right now, we're working with them to try and clarify, when there's community interest, where's the best place to bring your questions, your concerns. And we are literally working with them as we speak to try and develop a structure so that people can understand it's transparent. We understand what role, where does a concern or question come in. If there's vetting, where is that done? How is it done publicly? So, we've kind of heard the community loud and clear, and if we have the funding, then we can then go out and talk about the framework. If we don't have the funding, regrettably, we're still all looking at each other wondering, what are the resources to launch this? And we haven't had them in the past.
Yeah, so. I think when you were talking about the community charrette, community meeting, and there was some surveys that were done, not too long ago. And I'm still fairly new here in Concord. I've been here just over 2 years, and I poured over the survey and thought there was so much great feedback and new ideas to me. And when I talked to you all about it, Steve and Alan, you said these are great ideas, but they're not new to us. So we've heard this kind of confirms the feedback and what we've been hearing from the community about these kind of pressure areas. And so that was telling that I think there's a consistent voice from the community about the areas that are bubbling up. And, that meeting and that survey, that was part of our comprehensive transportation strategy that we're working on with Stantec. And that's kind of been pivoting and has a new life now. Alyssa, do you want to talk about where we are and what that's going to entail?
Yeah, sure, Megan. So as Alan mentioned, we did have the public forum. That was kind of our major public outreach where we, as with Stantec, we're receiving a lot of input and from the community on areas that they saw as needing improvement, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure needs, and anything from crosswalks to transit, really. So really very all-encompassing. And that was put on pause for about a year with some staffing changes. But I've been on board with Concord for about 6 months, and we're really excited to be starting up the comprehensive transportation strategy again. And we're going to be looking in the fall at starting it up in public with a public forum, a workshop with the Transportation Advisory Committee. And this strategy is really going to be helpful because it's going to look at all forms of transportation in Concord, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, potential transit options, as well as some lower cost, quick implementation type projects that we might be able to test some ideas to see, do they work? Do we want to commit full funding and design towards those in construction? So I think that will be really helpful. And it also will provide the background and kind of a comprehensive document which really draws all our planning resources together on transportation. It'll work a little bit like our comprehensive plan Envision Concord, but it'll be focused on transportation. And I think that document has been really helpful in guiding the community in all our planning efforts in different areas. So this is going to be really helpful just focusing on transportation in particular. And it will come out with strategies, recommendations for implementation, and it's something that the Transportation Advisory Committee can look to as they become more involved with prioritizing bicycle and pedestrian improvements going forward. And especially if Article 8 passes and there is, some dedicated funding towards bicycle and pedestrian improvements, the plan then has more legs to go forward. So I think that's really important.
It can also help us as we think about future funding opportunities with grants. I know when we have a solid strategy that's had community input and has been vetted, that's a huge piece of laying the groundwork for convincing others like state government or other agencies that yes, this is something we all want and we've identified it and we've thought it through. And if there's funding available, it makes a stronger case.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It helps to tell the story, and then it's something that is more easily translatable into grant applications, and it translates to the needs that Concord has, and it can really bolster a grant application. And then also, together with funding, that's going to be provided if Article 8 passes, it can make a project viable, maybe a project that, needs to get a little bit extra funding to get over the hurdle. Having the grant funding additional will probably make a lot more projects viable.
Yeah, oftentimes the state will look at its budget and late in a year decide they have funds available. And so those communities that are prepared or ready can take advantage of it. And oftentimes there may be a matching component to that grant. And so this allows us to point to the fact that we have the funding. And really the state's just trying to expedite the investment for a fiscal year quickly. And it often puts a lot of communities on their heels because they'd love to take advantage, but they didn't know it was going to happen. So this would position us to be able to be a little bit more strategic. And I will say, just as far as Alyssa's talking about, I want to be clear, and this is kind of interesting, this is a two-step process. Article 8 passed at town meeting with a more than a 2/3 majority.
I know, and I think when people are listening to this, they're going to say, "Wait, I already voted for that."
We voted,
and they'd be right, but we're not done.
Exactly. So the article at town meeting passed with significant support, and I think there was a lot of lead into town meeting, through the FinCom and hearings to explain what we're doing. And I think universally, those people who are paying attention sort of recognize the fact that this is the long play. And most importantly, they're going to have better service, better conditions by doing this. But the reality is it's a lot of money. We know that. The risk is if we don't spend the money wisely, we are still going to be spending a lot of money. And that was the shift that we made, which is, well, how do we spend? What's the rate of investment? And so really what people are being asked for in August is it's for the debt exclusion on a ballot, and that requires a simple majority. And it's on the ballot because it represents a temporary increase to fund this in property taxes. Mm-hmm. Because it's temporary, it's not an override of 2.5. And so we will borrow money, and we will, incur debt, and we will pay that off over time. And it is going to result in an increase to the taxes mm-hmm. for a short period of time. But really, by looking at what we talk about, the needs of, the cost for the program plus this backlog, if you don't look at the backlog, that's really your liability. And so the financial model says if you're not taking care of that liability, it continues to grow. So the reality is if we don't address that, we're actually going to be looking to Concord to spend more money over time with significantly less quality. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where you're going to have frustration. So I think we're looking at over a 10-year period, if you look at the finance, a net savings of close to $1,500 per household. That's a savings. But again, it's an adjustment in how we're going to invest. The goal is we reduce the backlogs, we improve the conditions of the pavement, both roads, sidewalks. We incorporate some additional components of traffic, pedestrian needs, significant changes in intersections, such as Kenny Dunn Square, for instance. We get the efficiencies of a larger project to give us better price and value in the contract. And we can design a project to be multi-year. Mm. And oftentimes these are big projects. And people seem to think that, to conceive and design and construct a road, sidewalk, intersection usually takes years,
and the construction seasons are short here.
They're very short. And we have historically been challenged with the fact that we wait till town meeting to know how much money we have. Town meeting this year was in June. Even in April, it's almost too late to really
get a contract and get someone on board.
The details of the construction, the RFPs out. People have already given their best bids and are working in other communities. So that's another opportunity where if we can sort of have this, contractors can look, they can see it might be multi-year, and we can invest in a contract where we're going to get the most value. So there's a lot of benefits that we are realizing with this approach that we've never had the opportunity to realize before. And it's exciting. And I think what's exciting for staff is we know the needs. We've heard it for years. We finally have a model or an approach that we can start. I go back to that mantra of we're identifying a project that we think we can realistically meet with the resources. And the resources are, funding is paramount. And that's what we're talking about with this ask.
And I don't want to end on a down note, but I am, the flip side here, I think you've explained is if this is not approved here at this election, we would be back to the way we've been operating. And is that fair to say? I mean, if we're delaying investment in the infrastructure, we'll be paying more and have a less satisfactory result.
Yeah, we know that.
Yeah. Okay, so I think unless are there any kind of final thoughts from anyone here about this program and the work that's being done? I think you all mentioned that there's a lot of players here. I mean, from police to Public Works Commission, Transportation Advisory Committee. we have public works, we have planning. In public works, that means highway and grounds, it means engineering. There's a real kind of wide group of interested people here that play a role. And it's been exciting to see as people are coming together to say, what's been going on needs to be changed. And let's think about a way to do this smarter and get a better result. And I think that conversation is continuing. And I think we're in good shape here.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Agree. And having been here for almost 30 years in public works, most of it is water sewer. So my focus was usually below the ground. But the last 5 years, I've learned a lot. Steve Dookran and his team, are outstanding. They've educated me so I can try and understand the problem and help communicate that. Alyssa is new to the team, and she brings with her, some expertise in transportation, working with some other communities, and the whole issue of connectivity is, important to us. So, yeah, I think we have, as we mentioned in a recent meeting with staff, we have all the pieces, or at least we will with the funding. It's just a question of how do we pull these pieces together so the community understands and has confidence that we're spending the money in the right places, we're addressing the concerns, and it's done in a transparent, open way, and that's sort of the next step.
Yeah. So my final words, Megan, would be, having been here not almost 30 years, but almost 6 years, I've been thinking and working hard at fixing what I see as needs, and they reflect exactly what people are asking for. Every day I cross the town borders to come into town, I see the reminders of what needs to be done, and having the resources will help us get there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that this funding will be critical for moving a lot of things forward, including transportation planning, pedestrian bicycle planning, and really give us what we need to be successful.
Well, thank you. And, the next step is up to the voters. The voters must approve this debt exclusion at the special town election on Tuesday, August 19th to get access to this funding. So as a reminder, look at your ballot and look for your ballot starting July 29th. Don't forget to register or apply to vote by mail if you're out of town for the summer. There's still opportunities to have your vote included. So thank you very much for this conversation. I think if people are interested in learning more, we have a lot of resources on our town website. As I mentioned, there's going to be voter information guides mailed out, and we're happy to continue the conversation. So thank you all very much.